Welcome to the Irish NFL show and welcome to our divisional preview. This show we roll around to the NFC North, which is a very changed scenario this year. Aaron Rodgers, of course, was the king in the North for many years. He is no longer with the Packers, of course. He's gone to the Jets. So Vikings finished on top of the division despite Rodgers and the Packers' best efforts last year. And it's there we start with the Minnesota Vikings. Colin, I'll come to you first on the Vikings. I know we've been back and forth during the offseason. I'm picking the Vikings as the prime contenders to regress next year. It's far too tempting not to for me, given how many of those one-score games they somehow managed to squeak their way through. And also, to be frank, how they were handled by any of the better teams they faced on their schedule last year. On the other hand, you have a little bit more faith in Kevin O'Connell, and particularly the addition of Brian Flores as defensive coordinator to address some of the problems that they had on that side of the ball and maybe help return them to the heights that they were at over the past season.
Yeah, I am probably higher on them than many people are. Like, I understand some of the concerns. I do, but I think that the players that they moved on from, they could. Dalvin Cook didn't offer the Vikings a whole lot last year, and for me, I suppose they're looking to move to a different sort of system on the ground anyway, and they were disastrous, absolutely disastrous defensively last year. Had the good fortune to see them live twice. I say good fortune because you got to see Justin Jefferson, and he is sensational. But it did mean that I got to see just how poor defensively they were. For them to have made the playoff, for them to have won 13 games with that defense is insane. I think the defense is going to be a lot better. I think they're better on the edge. I think they're better in the secondary. And I think the coach is so much better. And that's why I don't have them to regress as much. Do they win 13 games? No, I don't think they win 13 games this year. Though I will say that just as we're recording, Kirk Cousins came to the podium to address the media, and he has some of the finest facial hair you are ever likely to see. He looks like he walked straight out of 1892 saloon, and that he's about on his way to shoot the sheriff. So that instills even more confidence in me in what the Vikings might be capable of.
I'm going to say, just putting on the day job hat for a moment, and I am in the PR game. Whoever advised Kirk Cousins to go on quarterback has absolutely earned their bonus this year. It's been transformational in terms of how people see him. Suddenly everybody's like, oh, he's the nicest man in the world. He's ultra competitive. He's an incredible student of the game. He's totally transformed his whole not his persona. He's the same guy he already was, Brian, but the way people look at Cousins has certainly changed since that Netflix series aired.
Yeah, sorry, just on the latest scoop that Colin has said, his wife must be on a vacation, I can only imagine, because she seems to be the one that selects his clothes and selects the manner of how he will present himself. But I would agree with Colin on this. I'm quite high on the Vikings. I think maybe I'm sentimental because we had an opportunity to interview Kevin O'Connell last year, but he came across really well in the interview, and we saw over the course, and in particular even in the quarterback series, you saw some of the level of content in terms of the engagement and the relationship that he has struck up with Kirk Cousins, and where he was advising on certain plays, he wish he had given it to him as opposed to him calling the play. And I agree, Brian Flores, I think, is a huge impact, and everybody's going to talk about Justin Jefferson. I think we've a sneaky player in Jordan Addison who they selected in the first round, the wide receiver. And that's going to be a player that teams are going to have to handle. So does Justin Jefferson find himself getting even more opportunities, or maybe other players flourish because the double teaming on Justin Jefferson? I'm keen on the Vikings. I think we're in for another stellar season. And whilst a lot of people did suggest last year they won a lot of games, fortunately, and teams would have been getting back on the plane after the flights and flying back from Minnesota saying, how did we lose that game? It's a measure of a team and a measure of a head coach that they can find ways to navigate victories when it looks like they're doing. So no, I'd still stick with the Vikings as my team that I'd expect to be up there challenging for the division this year.
Like I hear that argument on the character that they showed in a lot of those close games, and particularly that insane game against the Colts. Now officially the biggest comeback in NFL history. As much of a disaster as the Colts were last season, the hole that the Vikings were in was quite the chasm to dig their way out of, and they did show a lot of grit to do that. It's just whenever they came up against anyone good, I mean, the Eagles just stomped all over them. There was 2 or 3 other bad beatings during the season, and of course the limp playoff exit against the Giants. It just said to me that the ceiling is low enough here now. And again, I also agree with Flores makes a big addition on that side of the ball. Of course he does. He's a defensive coordinator that I have a huge amount of faith in, but that's not necessarily a one-year job in my view. Like you're installing new scheme, a new defensive coordinator comes into town. Notoriously, it takes time. It's different on the other side of the ball. Offensive coordinators can come in, I think, and make a difference a little bit more quickly. I mean, I remember when Vic Fangio rolled into Chicago. Like he eventually got the Bears to be the number 1 defense in the league by 2018, but that took 4 or 5 years, and the Bears kind of bounced around in the low teens, high 20s for a couple of years before that scheme finally took hold. I'm not necessarily sure that the Vikings have the raw material that Flores can come in and help them flourish in year one. However, given how bad they were last year, you'd find it hard to see some manner of improvement. Although I'm certainly not as high on the Vikings as either you two guys are. But we might move on from there because obviously there's plenty of other teams to talk about. Colm, the Lions have been one of the stories of the offseason. We talked at the live show recently about which team had won the offseason. A lot of people say that the Lions had, although you might have made the same argument last year as well. They're the bookies' favourites to win the division. Can they justify that?
I think, I mean, they're the bookies' favorites, and one of the interesting things in relation to that, Connor, is that they are the bookies' favorites for the first time since 1982. People may remember E.T. Irish people might remember The Big Snow, or of course, grotesque, unbelievable, bizarre, and unprecedented, or Gaboo Government, and that's what that's the sort of territory we're in where we're talking about the Lions being favorites. But I can understand it because we talked on. When we're talking about the East, that the best move of the offseason was the fact that the Commanders managed to rid themselves of Dan Schneider. Well, if we're talking about potentially the best move where a team managed to retain somebody in the building, it might have been Ben Johnson and the Lions hanging on to their gifted offensive coordinator. It's a big test, right? They moved on from both of their running backs last year, one of whom had 17 touchdowns, but in short yardage situations. But they're trying something new. They spent big on the secondary. They brought in a new cornerbacks coach. They're looking at ways to improve that. I think the North will be competitive. But I can absolutely understand, given that, you keep go back to it. And sometimes people forget a little bit about that Packers-Lions game, right? They rightly bring up that the Lions won, but the pressure on them. Do you remember the fact that Aaron Rodgers was on Pat McAfee at the time? There was all the speculation around his future, and Dan Campbell wasn't made available to Pat McAfee to do an interview. And McAfee went on a rant where he wished very kind of sarcastically and repeatedly wished the Lions good luck, as if they were, didn't have a chance against this Packers team. They went in, they had nothing to play for, and they still won because they play for Dan Campbell. I think they'll continue to do that.
Brian, the Packers that Colm's just been talking about there, it's almost palpable, the sense of relief, which seems a strange thing to say when you've let a arguably first ballot Hall of Famer walk out of the building. I say in inverted commas, he couldn't get out of there fast enough in his own mind. But the Packers seem very relaxed. They seem to be really rowing in behind Jordan Love. We don't know, and we haven't seen enough of him to see what level of replacement he's going to be for Aaron Rodgers. He has huge shoes to fill there. But there's a lot of faith in LaFleur as coach. It's a strong roster on paper. This could, in a strange sort of a way, be exactly the break that both sides needs. It seems that Aaron Rodgers is reborn. Maybe the Packers can be reborn too.
Yeah, I had the good fortune to speak to Matt Snibin last week from The Athletic, and he has similar kind of feelings about it. He's been covering the team over the course of the last 5 years, and he says it's been a refreshing few months and a few weeks in training camp to be discussing a team with. He goes, the expectation isn't as lofty as it previously was, and you kind of get a sense that a lot of players are kind of galvanized by this because no one is giving this team a chance, but they still have a really strong defense. I mean, we saw the back end of the season last year when Rodgers still wasn't playing well that the defense stepped up and put them in position to win games, and he thinks that this team will flourish.
And I think they probably can flourish, Connor, because we probably underestimating Jordan Love a little bit, because had this been him coming in after Aaron Rodgers' 2 MVP seasons, it might be a little bit more difficult. But given everything that went on last year, the shenanigans, the injury, etc., I think expectations have been dampened somewhat. And you'd hope that the Packers would be smarter with the way they approach it. Like last year, even though Davante Adams was gone, they didn't seem to make any changes from the way in which they approached it. It was like, oh, Adams is gone, but we still have Aaron Rodgers. And you have to make some changes, if you can, when you lose a player of the quality of Adams. I would hope that they should be smarter about their approach this time around, and that would make a difference. But it is the time of transition for the Packers.
Yeah, speaking of transition, let's maybe get a couple of notes on my beloved Bears, who I picked to win no more than 6 games when we were doing our tiered list the other week, and I have to say I haven't seen anything yet that would make me change my mind. Still that big question mark, and I think it's fair to say that Ryan Poles, the GM, has a question in his head still over whether Justin Fields will actually be the guy. Certainly, they've got a lot more pieces in place to help him succeed this year than has been the case through the last couple of years. I'm still not entirely convinced that they've solved the offensive line woes, which would be the big worry I'd have going into the season. You'd wonder whether the turnovers that we saw and the heavy number of sacks that Justin Fields took, how much of that was actually on him and how much of it was on the offensive line, and where you draw the line between the two of them. Fields did have that tendency to hold onto the ball far too long, which is a bête noire of many rookie and early stage quarterbacks in their career, particularly the ones that have the sort of mobility that Fields have. That Fields has, rather, that because he knows he can escape and because he has the speed, there's always going to be that thing in the back of his mind that he can just hang on and get off platform and make a play. And too often that wasn't possible in the offense that he was playing in last year. It's amazing how much hope now in Bears Nation falls on the shoulders of DJ Moore. He's shown a couple of incredible flashes in both the training camps and in the preseason games, and he's very much a WR1 in my mind, probably somebody who was slightly underrated in what wasn't necessarily a great situation at Carolina, but he's expected to do everything for the Bears this year. A lot of people hopeful that Darnell Mooney, back from injury, will also light things up, and that the Chase Claypool pick, which has been questioned and people wondering whether there was value in that, having come back from injury and spent a full preseason with the Bears, that maybe he can he can be one of the answers that we've been desperately looking for in Chicago. Yannick Ngakoue, I think, has been a good addition on the other side of the ball as well. They desperately needed a pass rusher to replace what they've left. Of course, Roquan Smith shipped off last year. Robert Quinn let go. Khalil Mack had gone too. Ryan Poles kind of tearing down that defense during the season and freeing up salary cap room to make some free agent moves. We've seen a couple of them. We have a couple of good linebackers come in. There's a lot of hope that Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon will progress in their second years and that they'll prove to be good pieces in the secondary. But still, for me, I got to say, far too many unknowns to see the Bears moving out of the basement in the NFC North. I'm not sure whether you guys think any differently or whether I'm being too negative about Chicago.
I think ultimately a lot of it will come down to, and you touched on it very early on there, Colin, that's the offensive line. And as we lead towards the start of the season, this again, you're right, there's so many unknowns, but there've been so many injuries over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks. It looked like they were transitioning where it was recognised who the 5 guys were going to be. And between one injury and another, and then you get the Jenkins news recently, it feels like a bit of a patched up offensive line again. And we've seen over the course of the last 2 years, maybe more so last year in particular early on, where if it's patched up, it's not going to work for Justin Fields. And once we see the explosive plays, you're going to have the sacks stats are not going to be good either. And I think if the offensive line works, we can see a really strong Justin Fields flourish this year. But that's a big concern for me.
In summary, then, I get the impression that we're all settling on the NFC North being one of the more competitive divisions, and perhaps one of the more intriguing, because it's a little bit difficult to predict. We don't really have a consensus champion here among us, do we? I don't think anybody's going all in on the Vikings among us to win this one. So it's probably between those three, with the Bears struggling to catch up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would have the Lions probably slightly ahead of both the Vikings and the Packers. I think for me on the Bears, I don't think there's enough on the pass rush. And as Brian has said, the concerns that have grown around the O-line would be a worry. So I would probably say the Lions are my favorite. But then I don't think the Vikings will be as bad as people think. I think the Packers will probably be a bit better than people think as well. So I think the Lions are going to have to earn this division title if they are to win it.
I'm going to stick with the Vikings to win the division. And in fact, I'm going to say that the Lions don't make the playoffs. And maybe that's as bold a statement as I made last year when I said that the Seahawks would make the playoffs. And Colin has been calling out, and what he says, and I think he alluded to it earlier on, that Packers look refreshed without Aaron Rodgers. I'm going to suggest the Packers find a way back to the playoffs as a wildcard team.
I'm going to agree with you on one point and disagree on another. It's as weird as it sounds to say, I think the Lions are going to take the division. It's a long time since you've been able to utter that statement without people laughing at you. I think the Packers are going to be something of a dark horse this year. I think there's a possibility there that there's a wild card there for them. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. Okay, there we leave the NFC North. Thanks very much for listening to our divisional round preview.